Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, we'll be speaking about the history of Jews in Lithuania. And for full disclosure, a lot of it is going to be personal history because my family comes from Lithuania. And in some ways, it's going to be less academic than usual, but in other ways, it's more authentic because I'm really going to be sharing some information that's sort of a family history that can speak in ways that you don't necessarily catch in every encyclopedia. So just to give everyone an idea, my last name is Popko, which is an unusual name. And people ask me, where's the name from? Or it's an uncommon name. And it's uncommon. Most people with the last name Popko are related. Most of them are my second or third cousins. Otherwise you don't really see that name. If it's not from this close family, you don't see that name. Now, when going on the Yad Vashem website, there are more than 700 people listed there with the name Popko, meaning there were more than 700 people at the time of the Holocaust who were killed. And that sort of speaks to the tragedy of Lithuanian Jewry, which has the highest rate of decimation during the Holocaust, meaning while Polish Jewry had many more people killed in the Holocaust, in terms of the percentage of the Jews in that community, nothing's as high as in Lithuania. So the story of Lithuanian Jewry is a story of really great glory, but the tragic end of the Holocaust is really unbelievable in the sense that it really decimated more than 94% of Lithuanian Jewry. So there's really almost no one left who survived in Lithuania. But at the same time, while the bodies of the Jews in Lithuania were decimated, nonetheless, the spirit of Lithuanian Jewry is alive and well in other ways, in ways that you don't see in other communities, mostly, though, in the Orthodox community. Lithuanian Jewry shaped Orthodoxy as we know it today. Most of what you see in the Orthodox community is shaped in one way or another by Lithuanian Jews. And let me just speak a bit about that. So there's a fierceness to Lithuanian Jewry. There's it even has a name. It's called being a Litvak. Has anyone ever heard of that term? A Litvak is someone from Lithuania. And when we speak about Lithuanian Jewry, we're not just speaking about Lithuania, we're speaking about Belarus and Latvia as well. If you look around you in America, let me just show you in a very clear way how much Lithuanian Jewry has impacted everyone here. So, for example, the Yeshiva University is named Yeshiva Etz Chaim for the Yeshiva in Volozhin, Lithuania. The Yeshiva in Lakewood is named the Yeshiva of Kletsk, which founded by Rabbi Aaron Kotler, also Lithuanian. Yeshiva Rabbi Chaim Berlin in Brooklyn, also established by someone who studied in the Slobodka Yeshiva. Yeshiva Ner Israel in Baltimore is named for Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. The only chief rabbi that New York ever had, Rabbi Jacob Joseph, I'll speak about him a bit later, was also a student of Rabbi Salanter, Lithuanian Jew. Rabbi Lukstein, also from Lithuania. And I know, and I'm going to speak a bit about this, but Lithuanian Jewry was very fiercely opposed to the movement of Hasidut, of Hasidic, the movement of Hasidut. Now, that does not, so usually when people say I am a Litvak, they don't necessarily mean my family is from Lithuania. They mean we follow this school of thought that is non-Hasidic, more pragmatic, very committed to the study of Talmud. That's a Litvak. But you cannot deny the fact that geographically speaking, there were many Hasidic Jews who lived in Lithuania. In fact, some of you may recognize the word Chabad. Chabad originates in Lithuania, and what was traditionally known as the Jewish Lithuanian area. And so, and there were other Hasidic movements that come from Lithuania. Chabad, Karlin, Slonim, Koidinov, there were other. So it's sort of a irony, because you can have a Jew who's from Poland and he'll tell you, I am a Litvak, which basically just means that they're studying Torah and they don't dance or celebrate or do any of the Hasidic stuff. But at the same time, you can have a Jew who's a Chabad person whose family is from Lithuania, and then we'll say, okay, he's not a Litvak, but actually he is from Lithuania. So there's it became the word Litvak. In fact, in Israel, in terms of political science, the Orthodox community, the ultra-Orthodox community, is divided into two. There's the Hasidic community and the Lithuanian community. And I would say probably less than 5% of those who are in the Lithuanian community in Israel are actually Lithuanian. It just means that they are non-Hasidic. So because of the historic opposition in Lithuania to the movement of Hasidut, it became known as I'm a Litvak, which means I am not Hasidic, but it really doesn't do justice geographically. Because like I said, in fact, to this day, the only place that I can find people pronouncing the prayers in a way that's genuinely Lithuanian is Chabad. That's the only community that I know that can say, if you're wondering, the Lithuanian are famous for, instead of a O in davening, they say a. So they say Asher Kitshonu b'mitzveisav. And the only people who do that are Chabad. So ironically, actually, I would say Chabad are some of the most Lithuanian people out there. But Lithuanian Jewry is really, if you want one word about Lithuanian Jewry, it is fierceness. Everything they do fiercely. And that is something that shaped Judaism today. So everything they do is with ideology. There was very little materialism there, both practically and in ideology. They looked down on materialism. They were very stoic. I saw a very funny study today that says that they can trace your family origins based on how much, on the flavor of the gefilte fish you make. I know it sounds funny, but basically, if you are from what was called Galicia, which is Western Ukraine, and they had money, your gefilte fish is sweet. There was food, there was money. But Lithuanians, you'll have like this spicy, maybe some black pepper on your gefilte fish. That means you're from a bit more north. But that's not just a reality of life. It's not just that there was more money as you went south. Rather, the Lithuanian Jews frowned. In fact, their arch enemies were Galicianers, the people from Galicia. They considered them to be way too materialistic. My grandfather actually was a devout Litvak, ended up marrying someone who was from more of a Galicia background. So those things do have, it's a mixed interfaith marriage. But Lithuanians were very, very, very fierce. And that's why the people who came out of them there are some of the greatest leaders of the Jewish people, just because the fierceness was tremendous. Let me just name for you a few people. Menachem Begin was Lithuanian, all the Soloveitchiks, Lithuanian, all the rabbis who then came to America to sort of build the yeshiva world, which we'll talk about, Rabbi Aaron Cutler, Rabbi the Kahanemans. Many of these people are all Lithuanian, the first head of the Mossad, the person who first established the Israeli Mossad and who kidnapped Eichmann, Isser Harel, was also a Lithuanian Jew, the founding father of Chabad, Lithuanian. And so there's this fierceness we're going to talk about that comes with being Lithuanian, that comes with a tremendous devotion to ideology, frowning on materialism. YIVO, anyone know about YIVO, the Yiddish library? It's like the Yiddishist movement, very secular institution that believed in Yiddish as an ideology. Also comes from Vilna, the Musar movement. Many things come from Lithuania, and so it's a place of ideology. Really, Lithuania is a place of fierceness, of ideology, and it really produced some leaders that. We did produce the greatest recipes, and I'll be the first to confess that. The Lithuanian cuisine, as someone used to joke when I was growing up, you were lucky if you got a piece of herring for your bar mitzvah. But that was that. At the same time, it came with extreme devotion to ideology. And when they had ideology, it wasn't just to have the ideology, but it was to go with it in a very, very fierce way, with really profound conviction. And that's why to this day, if you go, especially in the Orthodox world, almost every undercurrent in Orthodoxy is attributed to a certain part of Lithuanian Jewry, whether it's Chabad, the Musar movement, the Yeshiva movement, all these different factions, even some factions of Zionism like Menachem Begin, all of them draw back to Lithuania because people didn't only have opinions, they really believed in them in a very, very strong way. And that's really the legacy of Lithuanian Jewry. So let's just quickly take a step back. So Jews start arriving in Lithuania. There are some records in the 900s, and there are also Jews arriving in Lithuania later in the 1200s. There's a very, has anyone ever heard of Yafa Eliach? Yafa Eliach, just another great Lithuanian person. She is the person who helped build the Holocaust Museum in Washington. She comes from a town in Lithuania called Aishishok, which is a small town very few people have heard of, but Jews have been living there for more than 800 years. And she was the one who had this idea of memorializing the Holocaust. That is Yafa Eliach. So the towns are not, it's not like I can tell you in Poland, towns like Warsaw and other towns. Lithuania typically has small towns, with the exception of Vilna or Vilnius, different names. But nonetheless, the Jews who were living there for a very, very long time. It's interesting that in those years, there were many Karaites. Does anyone know what a Karaite? Not a carrot, a Karaite. A Karaite is someone who believes only in the written Torah. They did not believe in anything rabbinic. They only believed in the written Torah. And interestingly, the Karaites were a significant minority in Lithuania, but they, because of sort of the fierceness of the Lithuanian Jew, they were completely separated, and they had no contact with the rest of the Jewish community for many hundreds of years. So much so that when the Nazis came to Lithuania, they were able to persuade the Nazis to say that they have nothing to do with the Jews, and they were left alone. And so there was a Karaite Jewish community in the 1300s, but the Karaite and the general Jewish population separated so fiercely that the two had nothing to do with each other. They still exist there today in a small amount, but completely separate from the Jewish people. In 1348, there's a massive wave of Jewish immigration to Lithuania. And Jews take advantage of the fact that the Lithuanian rulers give a lot of protections for Jews. So if you live in Lithuania, you actually have a fair amount of protections. If you kill a Jew in Lithuania, it's like killing someone from the nobility. There's no other countries, if you killed a Jew, you got off scot-free. There were actually protections. Interestingly, just this is a general fact about Lithuania in general. Lithuania is the last pagan country in Europe. This sounds kind of wild, but Lithuania was a pagan nation until 1569. There was no Christianity there until 1569. They were pagans, and many of the people were completely illiterate. The vast majority were illiterate, and so the rulers who wanted to develop economically invited Jews from Germany, from Poland, and they gave them rights because they wanted them to economically develop the Lithuania. And so Jews had actually a fair amount of protections. In 1495, though, for a very brief amount of time, around the same time as the Spanish expulsion, the rulers told the Jews they have to convert or not be Jewish or leave. And for most left and then came back. And by the way, these trends that you have in Europe of a ruler telling everyone to convert or die or leave, and then it turning over, helps explain why so few people were able to detect the danger of the Holocaust. Because if you've been living in Europe, this has been your life for 1,000 years. You know, there's always a new Meshagas, and if you just lay low, you'll be fine. And no one can dream of what was actually coming. And so Jews sometimes did have this yo-yoing, but in general, being under independent Lithuanian rule was great for Jews until Russia came later on. We're going to see Russia later conquered Lithuania. It was one of those countries where if you're Jewish, you knew that you were sometimes in Poland, sometimes in Russia, sometimes independent Lithuania, and that was just part of life. The Jews in Lithuania, the Jewish community continued to grow, and slowly but surely the place became a bastion of the study of Torah. People were very, very, very into the study of Torah. There was an extraordinary dedication to the studying of Torah, and that was the supreme ideology. I'm going to tell you guys some stories, which some will find funny, others will find will find very interesting. So or inspiring. So you have in the 1700s, there's a great rabbi. His name is Rabbi Aryeh Leib Ginsburg. He's known for his book Sha'agat Aryeh, or as Lithuanians would say, Shagas Aryeh. And there's a story about him staying in a home of a wealthy man, and he's studying Talmud. Now, not everyone had a copy of the Talmud. It was very expensive. And he's sitting and studying there. And the host tells him in the morning, I get a mazel tov. Why do you get a mazel tov? I had a baby. That's so interesting. I was sitting and studying all night, and I didn't hear a thing. And the host says, my wife was so concerned that your Torah studying will be disrupted that she was quiet the whole birth. Now, is this story true or not? And so that child goes on to be another great Lithuanian rabbi. Now, what's the underlying idea of the story are two things. Number one, an extraordinary and even radical commitment to the studying of Torah. That's number one. Number two, there's a certain almost, I hate to compare the two, but almost a Spartan element to the way Lithuanian Jews addressed the study of Torah. Studying Torah was not something that would be just an important or inspiring religious engagement. It was something you had to go with in all conditions. It's something that you had to do, not that you had to do, but the ideal would be to be a successful Lithuanian Jew. You would study Torah at all prices, at all costs, no matter what. And this is really what makes Lithuanian Jewry the engine behind the modern day yeshiva institution. The fact that you have a place where people are studying Torah with devotion and commitment is inspired by the commitment of this community to Torah. I'll tell you how this worked before it was institutionalized in a yeshiva. So there's a small town called Aishishok, which is not far where my family is from, Radin. There's Radin. My family was also from Lida. And interestingly, by the way, while researching for this talk, I had an identity revelation here, and that is I found out that my family in Lida in the 1800s had a big beer brewing business. That was, but it was typical. Jews were not in agriculture; they were beer brewers, they were furrowers, they were foresters, and so my family were beer brewers. Sorry. If they stay, no, if they stayed, they'd probably all be killed. But these were the things that Jews were doing. So in this town of Aishishok, there were synagogues, a few synagogues, and Jews across Lithuania knew that if you came to Aishishok and you sat and learned in the synagogue, the people of the town around dinner time, I don't know what about breakfast, but they would bring pots to synagogue with meals, and they would feed the people who would study there. And so before you had a modern dormitory, a university with endowment, or other way to make sure that people have the time to study, Lithuanian Jews had this unique system that no one else had that I know of, where you just come to my town, right? Imagine we did that right here. Anyone who came here to synagogue and studied all day would get a meal, which was a big deal, and would also be able to sleep in a room adjacent to the synagogue or in the synagogue. So it's not a huge bargain, but for someone who wants to devote themselves to studying, it's an amazing thing. You just leave everything, you study quietly. If you really want to focus on your studies, it's paradise. And so many Jews came and studied in Aishishok, and later I'm going to speak about the most famous of them, known as the Chafetz Chaim. He wrote the code of Jewish law that's most accepted in the Ashkenazi world today, and he wrote it while exactly doing this. He was sitting in Aishishok and studying in the synagogue, and people were bringing him food. And so this is the spirit of Lithuanian Jewry. In 1720, you have the birth of the most famous Lithuanian Jew. Who knows? Well, yeah, I think he still holds the status, even post Menachem Begin. I think he does, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong. Who is the most famous Lithuanian Jew? So in 1720, you have the birth of Rabbi Elijah of Vilna. Eliyahu of Vilna, also known as Hagaon mi Vilna, the genius of Vilna. Why is he known as the genius? Because already at a very young age, he's able to study Talmud in ways that are not seen elsewhere. He is at the age of 6 in the synagogue in Vilna, which was a very high-level intellectual place. He gives a sermon, a Talmudic sermon, a lecture even, that a professor would give. He's like a child prodigy, you know, the people who graduate medical school at the age of 15. So he was giving his Talmudical sermons at the age of 6. He grows up and he becomes extremely devoted to learning. He's the trailblazer, and he's considered the father of the movement of Litvaks, or mitnagdim, or as we say in Lithuania, misnagdim. What does that mean? He leads, we're going to see later, he also leads the opposition to Chassidut. There's this new movement of Chassidut, and he leads the opposition to it. But to understand the opposition to Chassidut, I'll just give a background, and that is after the Khmelnytsky pogroms in 1648, where many thousand, about 100,000 Jews were murdered in the most cruel way. Jews feel extraordinary despair. Jews are really, not just in Lithuania, Ukraine, there's immense despair around the Jewish world. And that's when a very, I wouldn't say cynical, I would say more psychotic individual named Shabtai Tzvi. Has anyone ever heard of him? Shabtai Tzvi gets up, he's from Istanbul, and he says, folks, good news, the Messiah has arrived. And it's me. And he has a very talented student. His student's name is Natan from Gaza, literally from Gaza, where there was a small Jewish community. And he's a great marketer. And this guy is so successful that tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Jews follow him in Turkey, in Poland, to the extent that many Jews are selling their businesses and their homes. Why? Because the Messiah has arrived. He doesn't just come with the news of being the Messiah, but he also comes with a change of doctrine. Obviously, you know, he makes certain changes in Judaism. And unfortunately, as high as the high goes, that's how sharply the crash comes. The Sultan hears about this, and he says, you know, enough with this. And he calls him, the Sultan of Turkey, he calls him over and he has him convert to Islam. Shabtai Tzvi uses his ideology to explain what he's doing. Eventually, by the way, the proof that he probably was psychotic, he tells the Sultan, I am such a great man that if you chopped my head off, I would come back to life. Spoiler alert, he didn't. But that's how he ended up dying. So he converted to Islam, and he ended up having himself killed as well. But the damage that he inflicted on many Jews was immense. Number one, the disappointment. Number two, some Jews, in fact, many Jews in Turkey, and some in Poland, and some in Lithuania, and some of these communities exist to this day in Turkey, accept this form of Judaism called Shabtaut. Basically, that we're in the Messianic era with whatever compromises in Judaism that had. Many of them are excommunicated, but there's a great bitterness to Jewish life. Now, why is this important to understand? It's important to understand because so much of what happens in the 17 and 1800s is a response to the Shabtai Tzvi debacle. Why? On the one hand, you have Chassidut. Chassidut says, look, our people are broken. Our people are decimated. There's suffering. There's pogroms. Life is miserable. And guess what? Not every Jew can sit and memorize the entire Talmud and feel great about himself. Some Jews are even illiterate. And so Chassidut is there to raise the spirit of the people. They teach you how to serve God by dancing, by singing, by going out to the field, by appreciating the beauty of nature, by connecting to other Hasidim, by going to your rabbi who doesn't only care about how much Talmud you've studied, but also wants to hear about your family, your business, and your life. That is the Chassidut. But then you have the counter to that, which is the Litvaks, and led by the Gaon of Vilna, the great genius of Vilna. And that is, wait, we have another movement here that's going to do exactly what Shabtai Tzvi did. So they're against the movement of Chassidut in a very fierce way, because first of all, they don't agree with much of the theology of Chassidut. And second of all, because they say, wait, we've been here. We've seen already someone come and say, yay, I'm the greatest guy. There's another guy after Shabtai Tzvi, much less popular, much less noteworthy, because He didn't have as much traction, but he was very impactful in some circles. His name was Jacob Frank. He was a Polish complete, I hate to say this, absolute lunatic, and he got also people to follow him and act in very strange ways, very sinful ways. Basically, his ideology was the more you sin, the closer to God you are, and you can see why that resonated with some, but not with others. And so the movement of Chassidut is at a time that's a bit paranoid. The Jews are like, wait, what's happening here? And remember, this is when you already have the clouds of Renaissance, emancipation, and science coming to secularize Europe. So the Lithuanian Jews, in many ways, especially the Gaon of Vilna, see themselves as the guardians of authentic Judaism. They say, we want the old package. We don't want anything new. And we have an ideology. And so the Gaon of Vilna is extremely devoted to the study of Talmud as it is. They're known to be cold. Litvaks are known to be cold. They say a joke about the Litvak Starbucks. When you buy, what happens when you buy the coffee at the Litvak Starbucks? It says content may be very cold, and so that's what they are. They see themselves as calculated, old school, scientific. Really, they study the Talmud. The Gaon of Vilna believes in studying as much Talmud as possible, and that the study of Talmud, for the sake of study, not for the sake of becoming a rabbi, not for the sake of being able to answer questions about Jewish law, history, anything, just the study for the sake of study, that is the foundation for the existence of the Jewish people. And he starts this revolution. And the revolution is, and some people may say this is what was always the case, but it was very unique. It was studying for the sake of studying. When you see people in yeshivas today, which didn't exist in America, you know, it used to be in America, even once they had yeshivas here, they were saying, why are you studying Talmud? Are you becoming a rabbi? But what he started, and that's the success of the yeshiva movement in America, is no, I am studying Talmud because this is what a Jew does. And so he really pioneers this, I would say, radical form of studying for the sake of studying. He himself does not accept any rabbinic position. His wife agrees for him to study in a closed room for years and years, and he's known to be, and he actually is, an extraordinary genius. He studies the 2,000 whatever pages of Talmud every single month anew. He writes, actually a fascinating aspect of his life is he writes corrections. If there are any mistakes, sometimes the Talmuds have different versions. One version says this, one version says that. And so he writes corrections, and actually many of his corrections are found in older manuscripts to be the right one. He's actually one of the first rabbis who says in that part of the world, let's study science and philosophy so that we can excel in Torah. And so he's very devoted. At the same time, there's another Litvak. Who's the other Litvak? The other Litvak, born in the 1700s, is in 1749, if you want the exact number, is Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi. Who is the Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi? Also born in what we would call someone who would be a Litvak. He is the founder of the Chabad movement. And he's the one who sort of tries to bring Chassidut, the movement started by the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. He tries to bring it into Lithuania, which is sort of like trying to bring American football to Spain or to the UK. It's a hard sell. So Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi, he is born as a Litvak, and he hears about this new movement of Chassidut, which is a movement about the service of the heart. It's about singing. It's about connection to God. It's not necessarily about the nitty-gritty, and you don't need to be a great Torah scholar, learn in a yeshiva for 10 years. You can sing and dance and drink a l'chaim. Has anyone here ever been offered a l'chaim at a Chabad occasion, or it's like, or asked to come and sing a song? That is, it's more of a folks Judaism, and it works much better in Ukraine, where people are folksy and working in fields, and it's a different geography, than it does in Vilna, which is a much more urban area. Nonetheless, Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi is a Litvak, and he goes to the Baal Shem Tov, he studies, and he decides he's going to sell Chassidut to the Lithuanian crowd, which again is a hard sell. He comes to Vilna, which again, this is like coming to, I don't know, it's coming to Boston and asking people to abandon football or something like it. It's like it doesn't work easily. And so he comes there, and the Gaon of Vilna refuses to meet him. And unfortunately, he's mistreated. How's he mistreated? Well, since the Litvaks are so devout to their tradition, and I must say this is a very dark chapter of our history as Litvaks, very dark. He is turned into the authorities. He's turned into the authorities. They say this guy's trying to bring up rebellions. He's disloyal to the Tsar, and he's imprisoned. And the day that he was let out is celebrated to this day by Chabad Hasidim. It's known Yutet Kislev, the 19th of Kislev. But he's imprisoned twice because the Litvaks want to get him out. He writes a book which is supposed to appeal to the Lithuanian mind. And he calls this book Tanya. I don't know if anyone has seen this book. It's a popular book in Chabad. But basically, it's the intellectual version of Hasidut. It tells you why the ideas of Hasidut, of devotion to God, of prayer, of purity of the heart, not necessarily sitting and studying Talmud all day, why these are the right things to do. He speaks about the evil inclination, the good inclination, all these concepts that are mystical, Kabbalistic, and also deal with service of God that does not have to do with the study of Talmud. And he tries to intellectualize it successfully. It becomes a very popular book. And he indeed is the father of an extremely successful movement. That is the movement of Chabad. Nonetheless, in Lithuania, it does not end up selling well. It's not something that many people buy, but slowly but surely it gains traction also in Lithuania. Again, the Gaon of Vilna, it had none of it, didn't want to meet him, and there's a very famous cherem, an excommunication written in Vilna on anyone who is part of the movement of Hasidut. Anyone who's a Hasidic Jew is excommunicated for not falling in place. Actually, the Lithuanian, also not a great part of Lithuanian Jewish life, the Lithuanian Jewish community, especially in Vilna, had a lot of control. And so if you broke the law, there was a place in the courtyard of the synagogue where you were tied. You received one lash or something from the court, and then everyone basically went and smacked you up for breaking the rules. But this didn't happen easily. It was for violators, and so yeah, the movement of Hasidut does not gain traction in Lithuania, but nonetheless, a Litvak, aka Rabbi Shlomo Zalman of Liadi, founds this Chabad movement, which is the most Lithuanian version of Hasidut. And if you hear the people of Chabad, the accent that they have, they are, I would say, the only ones I know who really preserve the Yiddish and the reading, the Torah reading, the Chelom, the A instead of an O in the prayers. They're the only ones who really preserve it. If you see on YouTube or anywhere the Lubavitcher Rebbe speaking Yiddish, there would be music to the ears of anyone who's a Yiddishist or appreciates Lithuanian Yiddish, because it's really the genuine. So it's just an irony that these Chabad people are actually, they are Litvaks, perhaps the real Litvaks. As the Gaon of Vilna becomes very popular, he has many students. One of his students is known as Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin. Volozhin is a small town in Lithuania you probably never heard of. But he establishes a yeshiva there, which is the first time in, I would say, many, many centuries since Babylonia, that young men come, they leave their family, they leave everything, and they study in one place. Full disclosure, and I'm very proud, obviously, I'm bragging here. My great-grandfather studied in this Yeshiva Volozhin. Why is it a bragging point? Because the number of Jews who came out of the Yeshiva Volozhin, who became really phenomenal leaders throughout the Jewish community, is really extraordinary, and that is unreplicated. It's a small yeshiva. At some points it has 100 students, maybe a little bit more, but the number of students that come from there, that build up New York Jewry, that build up the yeshiva in Baltimore, that build up many, many, many other yeshivas, it all goes back to the yeshiva in Volozhin. It's the first time someone says you don't need to have money to study Torah. It's also, if you think about it, it's a beautiful idea because it's sort of an equalizer. Well, it's not an intellectual elitism, but a financial equalizer. If you're a genius, if you're able to sit and study, some of them would learn 18 hours a day Talmud, then you can come here and all expenses are paid. So it produces some of the greatest Torah scholarship. It's the first yeshiva as we know it. And today, every Torah institution for boys, where they go and they study Torah, from Yeshiva University to the yeshiva in Lakewood, to the yeshiva in Baltimore, to the yeshivas in Israel, it's all thanks to that genesis of Torah study, and is really thanks to him. Now, at the same time, Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin sees that the movement of Chassidut is gaining traction, and so he writes a counter book to the Tanya of Chabad, where he tries to explain the ideas, the theology of being a Lithuanian Jew. What's the bottom line of all these movements, whether it's Chassidut or Lithuanian Jewry? It's the recognition that people were searching for more. People were searching for more spirituality. Chassidut provides spirituality very, very in a very available way, and he tries to show there are ways to attain spirituality and devotion that are also good and accessible to the masses, but they are not Chassidut. So that's Chassidut, and that's Hitnagdut. There's fierce opposition in the beginning. There's even an excommunication for anyone who's a Chassid, and the epicenter of opposition to Chassidut is Vilna, hence the Litvaks. Next comes another movement, which today also has a huge impact on the Orthodox world, in terms of who it gave birth to. There's a rabbi named Rabbi Israel of Salant, whose name came up in the newspapers during COVID. Why? This rabbi actually lived in the 1820s, 30s, 40s. He was a rabbi in Vilna. When the reason he became famous in America during COVID is because he was a rabbi in Vilna during the cholera pandemic. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, his idea that he sort of was revolutionary about was the idea of ethics. And he was the first one to say in Lithuania, guys, the Hasidim have a point. We should not only be studying Talmud, we also should be studying ethics of the heart, devotion to God, prayer, being good to one another. He saw many people studying Talmud and excelling, but being mean to each other. And he said, we need to also refine our character. And so he stands in the great synagogue of Vilna during the cholera pandemic, and he holds a Kiddush cup on Yom Kippur filled with wine, and he makes Kiddush in front of everyone and eats on Yom Kippur in front of the whole synagogue, because it was believed then, I don't know if this is medically true, I hear it may not be medically true, but the belief then was that if you eat, you'll be safer, you won't die from the pandemic. And fasting was dangerous. That was the medical belief. And so in order to show people that it's okay to eat on Yom Kippur and that your health comes first, he made Kiddush famously on Yom Kippur in the great synagogue in Vilna and ate. But that wasn't the only thing he did. The main thing he did was start this Musar movement, the idea of ethics. And he said, we cannot only study Talmud. We need to study the books about ethics, about the love of God, the fear of God, respecting other human beings. He famously walked once through the market late in the evening, and he sees a shoemaker, a very, very famous story. He sees the shoemaker fixing shoes. It's already 10 at night. And he says, shoemaker, what are you doing? It's late at night. Why are you still fixing shoes? And the shoemaker tells him, as long as the candle is burning, I can still fix things. And he leaves and he's astonished. And he says, as long as the candle is burning, meaning as long as we're alive, we can make things better. A very, very famous quote. So the idea he introduces is that Talmud study is not enough. You need, which is very revolutionary in the Lithuanian world. It's very revolutionary. The idea that there's anything other than devotion to halacha and to the study of Torah is revolutionary. And indeed, there are many who oppose him, and there are many who even condemn what he's doing. But then later, actually, people really pick it up. His students end up being some of the greatest luminaries who built yeshivas like Slobodka. By the way, anyone ever hear of the SAR school in Riverdale? What does SAR stand for? It stands for Salanter Akiva of Riverdale. So Salanter is Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. I'm just showing you how some of these rabbis, even though they come from a relatively small Jewish community, have shaped Orthodoxy as we know it. Another person that is a great rabbi in his time that affects all of us, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. He's the rabbi of Kovna, which is today in Belarus, and he is a great Torah scholar. To be a Torah scholar in Lithuania, you had to be. There are folk stories about that every wagon driver and every shoemaker knew the entire Talmud by heart. So, like, in order to excel, you had to really be phenomenal. You have to be brilliant. And Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector realizes how bad the situation of Russian Jewry is, and he pioneers two things. Number one, he starts fundraising from Jews in the West to rebuild Jewish communities that get burnt down, pogromed, etc. He also, many people don't know this, he writes secret letters to his fellow rabbis. Because he's such a genius, everyone's writing him letters asking him Talmudic and halachic questions. He is writing back secret letters about the situation of Jews in Russia, how absolutely persecuted they are, and those letters are translated to English, to French, and other languages, and they raise awareness among people like Jacob Schiff and other Jews in America and France and Europe that say, look, our brethren are being tortured. The Russian government doesn't like this. Unfortunately, he had a good intention. He tried, but this actually ended up backlashing, and a lot of Russians attacked the Jews. They said, who's sending the secret letters on how you're doing out to the West and shaming us in front of everyone? So that's another person who really changed a lot of things. In fact, those who know, Yeshiva University, REITs, has anyone ever heard of REITs? Yeshiva University, the theological seminary, is Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, because he had such an extraordinary influence on many, many Jews all over the world. Like I said, these are not the only ones. There are Menachem Begins, there's Bialik, a great Hebrew poet who studied in the yeshiva of Volozhin, and so on. The Brisk Yeshiva. If you look at a directory of yeshivas today, it almost looks like a directory of towns in Lithuania. I studied in Queens in a yeshiva named Grodna. There's an Israel yeshiva named Panovich. There's Telz. There's Mir. These are all named for towns in Israel. I'm sorry, in Lithuania. And so it just speaks to what a profound influence Lithuanian Jewry has had on everyone. I just want to do justice to something that needs to be said. I can elaborate here much more about Lithuanian Jewry, but in 1918, Lithuania gets its independence. There's a flourishing of Jewish life. Many Jews turn to Zionism, to the Bund movement, to Yiddish. But as World War II breaks out, Lithuania is split, and in the Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement, where the Germans and the Russians split Europe, and Lithuania goes to Russia, and many, many Jews from Poland start fleeing the Nazis to Lithuania. The Jews of Lithuania receive them with generosity. Everyone takes someone into their house. But then when you have Operation Barbarossa, the Nazis come to Lithuania. Now, it's a crazy thing to say, but Lithuanians were pretty much the only people who made the Nazis look nice, because the Nazis sent a complaint to Hitler about the barbarism of Lithuanians against Jews. The Nazis were offended by how the Lithuanians were treating Jews. It was so bad. Within the first 11 days of the Nazi occupation of Lithuania, 40,000 Jews were killed. One of the complaints sent by the Nazis was, usually they would have pits and shoot Jews into the pits and kill them and bury them. Some of the Lithuanians had no problem taking children and just burying them alive without even shooting anyone. The barbarism is unspeakable. And that's why I tell you that almost nobody survived, because it was the Germans were the ones, sort of, as crazy as this sounds, they were the ones protecting the Jews, obviously not long term, but if it was up to the Lithuanians, there would not be one Jew alive within a month. It's really, and I like to speak about the contributions of Lithuanian Jewry, But not just the destruction, but this gives you an idea of why nothing almost survived, because anyhow. And in 1996, the Lithuanian prime minister came to Israel and he apologized, but there isn't anything that really substantiates a huge amount of remorse. Although it should be noted today, there are relatively low amounts of anti-Semitism in Lithuania. It helps the fact that there's really no one to target left. There's about 2,000-3,000 Jews left in Lithuania. Before the war, there were 220,000. But the Jews that did survive, a lot of them survived as partisans in the forests. If anyone watched a movie called Defiance about the Bielski brothers, these were Lithuanians who went into the forest. Abba Kovner and the partisans of Vilna, and the famous partisan song. I don't know if anyone knows that it's in Yiddish, then it was translated, it's in Hebrew, but this was Lithuanian Jews. And it should be noted that after the war, people like Abba Kovner, they established a group called Hanokmim, the Avengers. And their plan was to go all over Europe and kill Nazis. And you realize that one of the reasons that this came specifically from Lithuanian Jews is because of the amount of destruction and the speed with which the destruction of Lithuanian Jewry came. They had this plan to basically go and kill Nazis all their lives in Europe. Now, they ended up turning that zeal in a good way, because they realized that there's a state of Israel that needs to be built, and then they helped build the kibbutzim, whatever. They ended up leading very productive lives. They went on to build their lives. But the greatest people, not the greatest, but many of those who captured the bitterness of the Holocaust were people like Abba Kovner. Sotzkover was another poet. The famous scene of the guy who faints in the Eichmann trial, Katzetnik, I believe he's also Lithuanian. And so the Lithuanian Jewry sort of almost fades, and those who survive are partisans. So, what do we have today from Lithuanian Jewry? In terms of the bodies, not much survived. But in terms of the fire, the ideology, whether it's Chabad, whether it's the yeshivas from Yeshiva University to Ner Israel, to the yeshivas in thousands and thousands of yeshiva students in Israel, all of whom consider themselves to be students of Lithuanian Jewry. All of them consider themselves to be some kind of evolution from the Volozhin, Slobodka, Telz, Mir yeshivas. That is very much a sort of a living candle that's left of Lithuanian Jewry. Yeah, that's it. All right. Thank you.